Welcome back to Alex Lavender's YouTube channel. And in this episode, we are going to be discussing renting versus buying in the Halifax market. And as usual, I am joined by Alex Lavender, who is a top-rated mortgage broker in Halifax and author of the best-selling book, Mortgage for Millennials. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. How about yourself?
Doing well. Okay, so to start, I really want to talk about the current market in Halifax. What does it look like to buy right now? What's the real estate market trending like in the Halifax area?
I mean, it's so like we're in an interesting time right now for sure. And, there are a lot of forecasts out there for the future of what this year is going to look like, what 2025 is going to shape up to be. And I feel like every, site or real estate company kind of has their own version of where they think this is going to be. But for the most part, the outlook is that it looks like prices are going to relatively remain stable with a small amount of appreciation, at least in the Halifax area. So, the big outlook is that prices are expected to go up a little bit. Interest rates are expected to come down a little bit, which gives a little bit more confidence in the market. So I think we're going to see some more houses change hands this year with the hopefully lower interest rate environment. And I think we're going to see a small appreciation in prices as well. Maybe, I don't know if I'm guessing, maybe 5%.
And what would you say to someone who's looking to buy in Halifax and sees conflicting reports from different real estate companies?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all predictions, right? It's like predictions of where interest rates are going, where house prices are going to be. It's all a prediction. And, I don't think that we're going to see a massive cliff drop off in prices. And I think that's the biggest concern for anyone. Like, what if I bought my house for 400,000 and now it's worth 300,000? I don't think we're going to see that. I think it's going to be relatively level with some small variations in price. But, the biggest thing is going back to that example. What if the value of the home was 400 and now it's 300? I mean, if you're living in that home, does it really matter? If you're not looking to sell that home right away, it doesn't really matter too much what the value is today. Like, obviously, no one wants to be an investment for, you've paid for more than what it's worth. But at the end of the day, if it does go down in value a little bit, it's not like you're going to give in the keys. You're going to stay in that home. And over the long-term horizon, in history, real estate has continued to go up. And it's projected to continue to go that way into the future.
Yeah, especially if our dollar keeps getting devalued. I feel like the price of everything just keeps going up. Now, I want to switch topics slightly and talk about renting. What are the general trends that have been happening in the rental market in Halifax, and where are we headed towards?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the vacancies in Halifax open up a little bit. I mean, I think for the last 2 or 3 years, we're sitting right around 1%. And now some new reports on the vacancy rate are saying we're at about 2, or maybe it's about 2.5%. So essentially just what that means is there's more rental units that are unrented or being available. And I think we're going to continue to see that trend because, immigration is kind of been frozen a little bit. There's less migration from other provinces at this point, and they're continuing to build rental stock. There's lots of cranes in the sky here. There's lots of buildings going up. Most of those are for rent. So, I think we're going to see just more spaces become available, take a little bit of that competitiveness out of the marketplace, and prices level off a bit. We're already starting to see prices in Halifax start to level off on the rental side a bit. I mean, the only downside is they're leveling off at a very high rate. So, that lower price bracket rents is just, it's so hard to find now. I mean, I don't think there's anything renting for under $1,000 a month, whereas like 5 years ago, you find it all over the place. Now it's like it's into the $2,000 range, it makes it very challenging for a lot of people.
Yeah, that is good to hear. Is a 2% vacancy rate, is that considered low in Halifax historically for rental
Oh,
units?
I can't even remember. You know what? It was I would just be guessing. I think it was like 5% back in like 2019, 2020,
Mm.
but that is just me guessing.
Yeah.
There's been I can't even remember what normal is now. I feel like everything's just up, down, and shaping around. It's been down in the 1% range for so long that that's just kind of where my mind thinks it is at the moment. But it the rental market was definitely completely different before COVID because there was you just didn't see this where people would line up to view units, hundreds of applications going in, and people constantly getting denied because there's just so much demand. Before it was more of a renter's market where people got to choose. um I feel like it was more in the renter's favor because there was just so many more options. So definitely there was definitely more options available before COVID for sure.
Yeah, I remember when I purchased my home in Halifax and I was looking at the interprovincial immigration numbers. And I remember Halifax or Nova Scotia was building something like, I think it was maybe like 2,000 units a year, but we were bringing in like almost 10,000 new people a year. And I remember looking at that and thinking, oh, I could definitely rent out my home, like if worse came to worse. And
Yeah.
that kind of really, at least for me personally, solidified, the security of buying a home in Halifax.
Hmm.
So now let's talk about buying a home in Halifax and really go over the pros and the cons of buying it, because I think that's something that people want to know, where a lot of people, just talk about the best reasons to buy a home, especially realtors, which I'm glad you're not one of those. And so let's take an honest approach to this. And let's start off with the benefits of buying a home in Halifax. What do you think those are right now?
I mean, some of the biggest benefits is just like your security. You have a home, you don't have to worry about trying to be in this rental market that's really, competitive and tough. It's like you've got your house, it's your place, no, at the end of the term, no one's going to say, no, I'm not renewing you for another term or anything like that. Like, this is your home, you've got it. As long as you pay your mortgage and, keep your house up, that's your place. Um, and a lot of other benefits are, uh, long-term appreciation. That's what we've seen over history. You pay your mortgage down, so your money's not going to rent, it's going into your house. It's appreciating over time. At least it has done that historically. And the mortgage is getting paid down. So, live in your home for 25, 30 years, you retire, you've got something to sell, and you've got that money that you can take out of it as equity to do something with. Other than that, it's just a lot of the other things of just like, your pride in home ownership, where you can, do renovations and make it exactly how you like because you know that that's your home. It's there. It's not like a space that you're renting where you wouldn't want to put any improvements in because when you're done there, that's it. If you want to build a deck, you build a deck or put in a pool or whatever it is. So I would say that those are some of the biggest things with owning a home.
I love the sense of security. I think that's huge, especially for a lot of people renting right now. I've seen so many stories of people getting kicked out of their homes because there's a renovation going on or they're selling it. And then they're just put into this rental market where they don't know if they can find another rental. And so I think buying the home, that having that security is a really, really nice thing, especially if you are, a millennial that's like starting your family or wants to start a family. I think that it's a really worth a lot in my opinion.
Mhm.
But I do want to ask you, you mentioned that once you buy a home, you will get your mortgage renewed. Have you seen instances of a homeowner when their mortgage does not get approved for renewal?
Very rarely. Yeah, very rarely. And typically a lender's always going to offer a renewal. Sometimes they may just give you an open rate, which is at a very high interest rate, usually double what you have, which essentially allows you to pay it off at any time without penalty. As you get this issue figured out, whatever that issue may be. So typically it's very rare that we see someone that's not being renewed, and typically it has a reason behind it. So it's like, if you've missed a lot of mortgage payments or you're currently in a mortgage arrears, then the lender may not want to renew. for obvious reasons. They have concerns about you paying the mortgage. Sometimes we run into other issues at renewal, such as, like, let's say there's a separation and one of the partners does not want to be on the property anymore, but it's up for renewal and they need both signatures to renew the mortgage. In those types of situations, it goes into an open until it kind of gets figured out. Another one is the death of one borrower or maybe both borrowers and the estate's trying to get the home. Those kind of little bit more complex situations are the main reasons that um, you know, they need time to figure out the renewal per se. But no, I think it's very rare that a lender's not going to renew the mortgage. It's very rare to see that.
And what if my credit score dropped? Would that be a reason that someone would, or like a lender would not renew my mortgage?
Not all lenders obtain a updated credit bureau before renewing the mortgage. A bigger issue tends to be like if you've had like a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, and it includes trade lines from that lender. So like if you were with bank, let's say Scotiabank, and you had a credit card with Scotiabank and you wrote it off in a consumer proposal, that, may be a little bit concerning for them. But again, we still typically see these people getting renewed. I feel like it doesn't really affect the mortgage. That's an internal banking thing that they do, and it's not something we typically see every day because, sometimes the client and the lender are communicating directly over this. Um, but I would say, even if your credit has taken a hit, or if you've had a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, lender's typically going to still renew. A lot of the times we will have clients that reach out that are looking to transfer lenders to potentially get a better interest rate, but they have something like a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy. And because of that, they actually can't leave the lender. They have to renew with that lender.
Interesting. And let's talk about the downsides now of buying a home, specifically in like the Halifax, Nova Scotia area.
I mean, there definitely are some downsides of buying a home. I mean, one of the big things with a home is there are maintenance costs that you have to factor in. Things break down over time and, things break down. So it's really important to have a little safety net of money because some of these things on a home are very expensive. A roof can cost tens of thousands of dollars. A furnace, for example, $5,000, $10,000 could be a surprise and urgent thing that you need to fix in the middle of winter. So you do have those maintenance costs that are a bit of a downside.
Yeah.
Also, maybe if you're younger and you're not sure where you're going to live or what you're going to do, house does kind of tie you down. Sometimes it makes more sense to just figure out, like, are you going to be living in Halifax? Are you going to move to Ontario? Are you going to move overseas? A house does kind of tie you down to one location and one community. You could just, like, for example, if you're in Toronto, for example, and you bought your house and it's you got a deal, it was out in Barrie, and now you're working downtown, it's a huge commute every day. I mean, now maybe you want to have a home that's much closer to the city, but again, it's kind of hard to do that once you've already kind of put your roots down and bought the property. I would say a big thing that needs to be recognized is that there's a lot of costs with purchasing and selling a home. So it's not just one of those things you can just buy for a year or two and then decide to move and buy another home. It's going to cost you a lot. I would estimate it at 10%, is probably the total cost that you're going to pay to buy and sell. Because on the buy side, you've got your deed-transfer tax, inspections, lawyers, etc. And on the sell side, you've got your realtor fees, lawyer fees again, and some other costs. So I think renting does have a place. It does, but there are definitely some downsides to home ownership. I think that those are probably the biggest ones. Are you do have a lot of additional costs, and it does tie you into one location for sure.
Yeah. If you just think about buying one home and then selling it and buying another, like the amount of fees that just go out in your closing costs for both homes and then your selling costs, that would eat away at like 1 or 2 years of rent, right? And so
Mhm.
if you do that in just a couple of years, you're going to be like cash flow wise, you're going to be better off renting. But I noticed you talked about 10% of closing costs and selling costs on average. Nova Scotia just announced that they're raising their out of province home buying tax, and I believe it's being raised to 10%.
Mhm.
What is, who does that apply to, and can you get exempt for that?
Yeah, I don't think there's really any ways to get exempt for it. It doesn't have that same set of exemptions like the foreign buyers ban that's currently in effect nationally, like across Canada. Yeah, they've increased it from 5% to 10%. I believe that starts April 1st. Um, it's essentially an out of province buyer's tax. So if you are out of province and buying a property here and Nova Scotia is not your home residence, then you have to pay this deed transfer tax, and it is on the full value of the home. So I guess that would apply for someone who, in another province or potentially even in, another country if they're not exempt from the foreign buyers ban. The buying cottage, rental property here, and even some challenges start to come up when it's a parent co-signing for a child living here. So that it starts to get complex. It's something that should be talked about with a lawyer, maybe even an accountant. But essentially, the biggest problem we see is like parents living in another province, buying a property for their kid going to school here or co-signing with them, and then being liable for that tax. That's um, that's where we're seeing a lot of it. Also, the people buying the cottages here as well.
Hmm. Now, before we move on to talking about the pros and cons of renting, I want to ask if someone is considering buying a house in Halifax or Nova Scotia, when should they reach out to a mortgage broker like yourself? At what point in their journey?
Yeah, you know what? I think at any time is a good time. The earlier the better, though. Um, a lot of the time you see people out shopping for homes, getting excited uh, before they kind of go through the financing process, and it can be a bit of a letdown sometimes. Not necessarily that they may not be able to qualify for that purchase price, but more what the payments may be. So I always say it's good to do it early on, find out what the payments are going to be, make sure there's no issues with qualifying, make sure everything's in order. Because sometimes some of these things take 1, 2, 3 months uh, to kind of resolve or be fixed. So I say the sooner the better is always great. You know what? You can have an initial look now, and then down the road in the future, you can always update. It only takes a few minutes to update.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can use the link down below to get in touch with Alex and start that journey for getting your mortgage approved. So let's talk about the pros and cons of renting. So, Alex, what are the benefits of choosing to rent?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of the opposites of home ownership in a bit of a way. So there's lower upfront costs when you're renting. It's not like you're putting a down payment on a home and have to pay all these closing costs. So it's really beneficial if you don't have your savings available yet for a home. So that's a nice thing. Low upfront costs, the flexibility to move as well. Just like we're kind of talking about before. Um, you can live somewhere for a year, move somewhere else, even in the year, if you need to give up your property, you can typically sublet it as well. So there's a lot of flexibility there, which really helps. And you don't have those large maintenance costs. If something were to go wrong, that's on the landlord to fix. So you're not getting any surprise large expenses. And sometimes it may get you even closer to a certain area, like maybe downtown or another area that you want to live, or a very nice neighborhood that would be very expensive to buy a home. Like for instance, in Halifax here, the South End is a very desirable area. The homes typically start at million plus. And, you know, that in central Halifax, those homes are really in the $1 million range. But, you could probably find an apartment or, a home or something like that to rent, and it would be significantly less than what the mortgage would be for someone putting 5% down to buy one of those homes. I mean, very attainable. I mean, in comparison to $1 million purchase, I'd say maybe between probably around $2,000 to maybe $3,000 a month. I wanted to say 1,500, maybe 15,000. Being optimistic. I don't know if that still exists. Maybe it's a small place, but um, yeah, in other amenities, too, like, a lot of these buildings have like maybe pools or fitness or something like that located in them as well. So that's also a perk.
And what about the downsides of renting in Halifax?
Yeah, so downsides, you are paying rent, so you're not building up equity in anything. So that appreciation of the building is not for you. You're not paying down a mortgage. So when you leave at the end of your term, that's it. There is the possibility for potential rent increases. We have them capped here for now in Halifax, but that may change. Even with the cap, you could still experience some rental increase year over year. But also, there's a little bit less stability. If you're on a 1 year fixed term, at the end of the term, the landlord may decide that they don't want to renew that lease. And if that's the case, then you're going to have to go find another place. And that might be at a significant rental increase, or it may be even hard to find what you're looking for. Another thing too is like people have pets, it's very challenging as well. The rental market really doesn't cater to people with pets. I'd say if I had to guess, I would say like 15, maybe 20% of the rental units allow for pets, whereas a lot of them don't. So, that can be really challenging as well. So with rental properties, one other downside is, you're typically confined to probably like an apartment or maybe a couple homes. Whereas when you're buying, it's typically going to be more homes than condos, at least here in Halifax. Yeah, those would be the downsides, I would say.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I believe on the potential rent increase, I think it was first introduced in Nova Scotia as like a temporary measure, but like it's been in place for like 5 years now or something like that, and just
Yeah,
seems to be a permanent measure now.
just
But
keep renewing
again,
it. Yeah.
yeah, who knows? Maybe it does change. So we shall see.
Hmm.
So, Alex, you have helped thousands of people get mortgages in Halifax and in Nova Scotia. So, from all of your experience, seeing the financial side of things, I want you to tell the audience, when would buying make more sense for a given person?
Yeah, I think buying makes a lot of sense if you know like you're going to be living here. So if you plan to live here for 3, 5, 10 years and that's your plan, then I would say buying does make a lot of sense because you can set your roots down, you can get in your community, you can get to that school you want if you have kids. So if long term location and area and all that are in your horizon, then home ownership definitely starts to make a little bit more sense. Um, if you're someone that also really enjoys, maybe like fixing up your home and making it your own space and like landscaping and like gardening and like that kind of stuff, home ownership could also be really beneficial because, like I said, most of the rental stuff here in Halifax is condos. So, typically when people are buying, it's going to be for a home. And, I think it's a really good strategy, especially when you're young, to have a home because it builds up that wealth over time. It's like forced building of wealth. Sometimes it's really hard for us to say, we're going to set aside $100 every week from our pay and put it in this account at this investment. And sometimes it's complicated too. Whereas, when you own a home, it's forced essentially. It's $2,000 a month for your mortgage. $300 of that, for example, is going right to principal, and it's paying it down every month, and it's going to be there for you later, if everything continues on the way it does.
And when would you see someone come into your office thinking about getting a mortgage? When would you say that they should actually look at renting as the better choice?
Mhm. typically people that are unsure about where they're going to be living, so here's a big one. A lot of the times we've seen, or at least over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of people moving from other provinces to Nova Scotia. And a lot of people want to purchase. They're like, I'm talking to them and they're in Ontario or BC. They're like, hey, I'm moving here with, maybe I'm relocating through my job or family or whatever it is. I'm going to be there in 6 months and I want to buy in this area. Um, and they want to get pre-approved for a mortgage, which has its own challenges moving provinces. That's a whole nother matter. Some people it works out for, and some people it doesn't. But what I typically tell those people is, come here for a few months and rent first. You don't know what that area is like just looking at it on Google Maps and some listings. Until you come here and put your feet down, you live in that area, and you realize like that's where you're going to be like working and what school you want to go to and all that. Um, you know, that's when it really starts to make sense to buy after you've been here for a few months, because it always looks better in the photos and everything looks great mapped out. I was just recently on a trip and you look at things on the map and you're like, oh yeah, this is a great area. We're gonna stay here. And then you just get there and you're like, okay, this is a little different than, and you look back and you're like, oh, I didn't see that in the photo, or that this was over here, or, it's in this area, or it's this far away from that, or not close to a subway station. And that's just staying somewhere for a week, I couldn't imagine if I bought something there. So I think that that's a big thing. If you're coming from a different province and you're not sure about the area, rent for a couple months or hop on an Airbnb first and then look around and buy. That wasn't possible for a lot of people during COVID, but now it is. I would say renting is also probably good for some specific people as well. And it just depends on your exact situation. Like, for example, if you don't have any money in savings, I don't think it's a great idea to buy a home, especially if you have a lot of debt. I think it's great to get in the door, but there are concerns, like what if something goes wrong with that house? The last thing you want to do is purchase a home, use every last cent, be tapped out on debt, and then the roof goes. And you have to try and find 20 grand. And it's just going to put you in a really bad, probably downward spiral that you could just probably have avoided. So I think, in a situation like that, if you don't have any savings or any fallback or anything at all and you're maxed out on debt, might not be the right time. Might be just a little bit better to improve your situation there. It's just ensuring that you have like stable income and, a stable job as well. Because, if you get into this home and you're not sure about your job security, even though you've bought it, it can be a really stressful place having to run around and find ways to, I mean, you're going to have to do that with renting as well. But I think with a home, it can be even more challenging because there are additional costs.
Yeah, I know when I bought my roof, it cost almost $20,000, which for some people is almost an entire year of rent.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's something that was on top of our mortgage, on top of our utilities, and came in one big bill all at once. It's not something I'm spacing out over multiple months. So definitely something to consider. Now, what would your favorite three neighborhoods be to buy a home in Halifax?
I think it's just so specific to each person and exactly like the lifestyle you want. Um, I mean, like I think North End of Halifax is a great area. A little bit more expensive than maybe some other areas, but I think it's a great area. It's got that community feel to it. You're still really nice and close to downtown. You've got a lot of those like cool coffee shops and stuff like that around. So, I think North End's great. Um, Dartmouth, areas like Portland Estates in that area. There's a lot of areas in Dartmouth I really like. It's the city of lakes. I mean, everywhere you look, there's water. There's lakes everywhere. And, you know, I feel like most homes, you have a view of the lake, you could be really close to the lake, stone's throw away. And I love a lot of the communities in Dartmouth for that. So if you're, love water and a little bit of nature and stuff like that, I think that Dartmouth is a great place to be. House prices are still reasonable in a lot of those areas too. And you're still really close to the city, even though you're on the other side of the water. You got to take a bridge or a ferry. You're still close. And there's a lot of development going on in Dartmouth too. So I think we're going to see a lot of growth. And then the third area, I mean, it's just so many areas. It's so hard to say because it's so specific to the actual like person, what you want, you know. I think Bedford's a great area as well. I mean, Bedford definitely a little further for getting into the city, definitely a little bit more traffic, but you know, you definitely got a good sense of community there as well. Homes are a little larger. Sometimes, you know, you're getting backing onto some woods or maybe a little extra acreage, depending on how far, you know, you start getting into Hammond's Plains and stuff like that, and you can get some more acreage. But I think the nicest thing about Halifax is there's so many different options and they're all really close to the city. For as, you know, do you want to be right downtown living in an urban area? Do you want to be near a lake? Do you want to have a nice big home on like 3 acres? You've got all of that really close to each other, which I think is really cool about Halifax.
Yeah, I think it's funny when we talk about, Bedford being so far away from the city, but you tell someone from Toronto that, hey, your worst case scenario is your commute to downtown is 45 minutes. They would be like, what? That's amazing. So I think we are pretty lucky in Nova Scotia and in Halifax to be so close to everything truly.
Mm-hmm.
Last question for this episode. And before I ask it, please make sure to subscribe to Alex Lavender on YouTube to get more amazing content on buying a home in Halifax in Nova Scotia, improving your mortgage and your financial situation with real estate. But Alex, are there any government incentives or grants for first-time home buyers in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, there are. I'd say, you know, the best one that we have that a lot of other provinces don't have is the down payment assistance program. And when it first came out, it wasn't used very much because the restrictions on it it was too restrictive. I mean, I think the maximum house value at the time was like 250,000, which has grown now. I believe Halifax is 575. It actually has been changing a lot. And it's different areas have different house prices, and there's a maximum income cap on it as well. But essentially, it's a 10-year loan where there's no interest, and you pay your payments back over 10 years, and they give you the down payment for the home, 5%. So essentially, you're borrowing the 5% down payment at 0% interest. So I find that's really good for people that have almost been able to save up the down payment themselves, or that are pretty close to having the whole down payment, because that takes care of the down payment, and then it gives you that extra money to cover the closing costs, to cover your inspections, to cover, your legal costs, your deed transfer, all those closing costs, and have a little bit of money left over for any emergencies. So that has been a really good program. And that one is specific to Nova Scotia. It's the Nova Scotia Down Payment Assistance Program. I think that that's probably one of the best programs specific to a province that we have here. A lot of the other first-time home buyers are national, available all across Canada, but this one I think is the best in Nova Scotia.